My parents gave my college fund to my brother 20 years ago, telling me, education is wasted on girls who'll just get married. Today, I sat across from him in my foundation's boardroom, watching the color drain from his face as he realized who would be evaluating his desperate $10 million grant application. The look in his eyes when he recognized me, his failure sister who now controlled his company's future, was absolutely priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The elegant conference room of the Reynolds Foundation had always intimidated visitors with its understated power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, while a massive cherrywood table dominated the space. Award plaques and impact photos lined the walls, showcasing 15 years of the Foundation's philanthropic achievements in technology education for underserved communities. I sat at the head of the table, my portfolio open before me, watching the door with practiced calm. The nervousness I might have felt had dissipated weeks ago when I first saw Axion Tech's application in our system. Now, a strange serenity had settled over me. The kind that comes when you've worked methodically for decades, knowing that eventually your path would cross with those who once dismissed you. Everything is ready for the Axion team, Ms. Reynolds, my executive assistant Zara said, placing a fresh notepad beside my tablet. Their financials are concerning, to say the least, without this grant. She left the implications hanging. Thank you, Zara. Let's see what they bring to the table, I replied, adjusting my glasses. I could have recused myself from this evaluation. Perhaps I should have. But 2 decades of building my foundation from nothing had taught me something. About fairness that my family never had. Everyone deserves an equal chance to succeed or fail on their own merits, even Nathan. The thought of my brother brought a momentary tightness to my chest. We hadn't spoken in nearly 15 years, not since our father's funeral, where he'd approached me with that familiar condescending smile, offering a junior position at his then flourishing company. Something suitable for your limited experience. I declined politely, already 3 years into building what would become the Reynolds Foundation, though he hadn't bothered to ask about my work. The conference room door opened, and Zara ushered in the Axion delegation. 3 men in expensive but slightly worn suits entered, their faces bearing the strained optimism of the desperately hopeful. And then Nathan appeared behind them, older, grayer, the confident swagger replaced by a careful tension I'd never seen in him before. He stopped abruptly when our eyes met, recognition and disbelief fighting for dominance in his expression. "Welcome, gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, despite the surreal nature of this moment. "Please, take a seat so we can begin." Nathan moved mechanically to the chair directly across from mine, his associates exchanging puzzled glances at his sudden rigidity. "You know each other?" asked one of the men, their CFO according to my notes. Nathan cleared his throat. "This is my sister Caroline," he said, his voice strained as he attempted to project casual normalcy. "I had no idea she was affiliated with the Reynolds Foundation." I smiled professionally. "Actually, I founded the Reynolds Foundation 15 years ago. Reynolds is my married name." I directed my attention to the group. "But personal connections won't influence our evaluation process. Your application will be judged solely on its merits and alignment with our mission." Nathan's expression flickered between shock, confusion, and something harder to identify. Perhaps pride, perhaps shame. The CFO, oblivious to the undercurrents, launched enthusiastically into their prepared presentation. The Axion Educational Technology Initiative would revolutionize STEM access in rural communities, he began. But I was watching Nathan, whose eyes hadn't left my face. He wasn't listening to his colleague's pitch. He was calculating, reassessing 2 decades of assumptions in real time. I remembered the last family dinner before I left home, my acceptance letter to MIT crumpled on the table. "We've discussed this," my father had said. "Nathan's business degree is the priority. The company will be his responsibility someday. My mother had avoided my eyes. Be practical, Caroline. What's the point of wasting money on your education when you'll just get married and have children? Nathan had said nothing, accepting his advantage as his birthright. Now, 20 years later, he sat across from me, dependent on my foundation's grant to save the company he'd inherited and subsequently driven to the brink of bankruptcy. The CFO continued outlining their proposal, but the numbers didn't add up. Their technology was outdated, their implementation plan vague, their budget allocations inconsistent with our requirements. Under any circumstances, they would be unlikely candidates for our funding. But I listened attentively, asking pointed questions that made the CFO sweat and the other executives shift uncomfortably. Only Nathan remained still, watching me with growing comprehension. He recognized my questions, the incisive, analytical approach that had once made him call me obsessively detail-oriented, as if it were a character flaw rather than a strength. Now that same attention to detail was dissecting his company's proposal, finding the weaknesses he'd hoped would go unnoticed. Your development timeline seems optimistic, I noted, referencing a specific page in their proposal. Especially given your current staffing limitations. The CFO fumbled through an explanation about contractor relationships and potential new hires contingent on funding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot. To us. Now back to the story. Nathan finally spoke, his voice quieter than I remembered. Caroline is right, he said, interrupting his colleague. The timeline isn't realistic. We'd need at least another 6 months for proper implementation, assuming we can attract the right talent. The admission seemed to physically pain him, but there was something different in his tone, a reluctant respect that had never been there before. The meeting continued with this new, strained dynamic. Their pitch deteriorated further as my questions revealed more inconsistencies. By the time they reached their funding request, $10 million that would essentially save Axion from collapse, even Nathan's colleagues looked defeated. Thank you for your presentation, I said as they concluded. Our committee will evaluate your proposal against our funding criteria and mission alignment. We'll have a decision for you within 2 weeks. The executives gathered their materials. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. Nathan lingered as they filed out. Caroline, he began, then faltered. I raised my hand slightly. The committee will evaluate your proposal fairly, Nathan. That's all I can say at this point. He nodded, understanding the boundary I'd established. But instead of leaving, he asked, Did you really build all this yourself? His gesture encompassed the room, the foundation, the entire operation that now controlled his fate. Yes, I replied simply. While you were running Dad's company. The unspoken comparison hung between us. The company he'd inherited was now failing, while the foundation I'd built from nothing was thriving. I never knew, he said finally. I never asked, I corrected. He accepted this with a small nod. That was my mistake, one of many. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I was wrong. We all were. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone with the weight of a vindication I'd never actually sought. I hadn't built the Reynolds Foundation to prove my family wrong or to position myself above Nathan. I'd built it because I saw a need. For education, for opportunity, for the chances I'd nearly been denied. As I looked around the boardroom that represented everything I'd created from scratch, my mind drifted back to that pivotal moment when my dreams were dismissed. After the devastating family dinner, I'd retreated to my bedroom, tears streaming down my face as I stared at the MIT acceptance letter. The prestigious institution had recognized my potential, offering a partial scholarship that would have covered half the tuition. The other half was supposed to come from the college fund my grandparents had established for both Nathan and me. I remembered lying awake that night, contemplating my options. I could surrender to my parents' decision and abandon my educational aspirations, or I could forge ahead on my own terms. By morning, determination had replaced despair. If my family wouldn't support my dreams, I would find another way. The next day, I'd applied for every scholarship I could find, scheduled appointments with financial aid advisors, and began searching for part-time jobs that could accommodate a student schedule. My parents had interpreted my efforts as youthful, stubbornness that would eventually yield to practicality. They didn't understand that their rejection had ignited a fire within me, a commitment to prove that my potential was worth investing in. For 3 years, I worked multiple jobs while attending community college, saving every penny I could toward transferring to a 4-year university. When I finally secured a full scholarship to Berkeley's computer science program, my parents had treated it as a pleasant surprise rather than the culmination of years of relentless effort. "Well, isn't that nice?" my mother had said when I shared the news. "Though I still hope you'll meet a nice man there. Education is wonderful, but family is what truly matters for a woman." Even this backhanded acknowledgement had been more than Nathan offered. He was already immersed in our father's company by then, being groomed for leadership while I worked as a server in a campus cafe between classes. Those years had been transformative. The struggle to finance my own education had taught me resilience, resourcefulness, and the true value of opportunity. Every scholarship essay I wrote, every grant application I completed, had given me insights into the power structures that determined who received support and who didn't. These experiences would later inform the founding principles of the Reynolds Foundation. The belief that potential existed everywhere, but opportunity did not. After graduating with honors, I'd declined job offers from several tech companies to join a small educational technology startup. The salary was lower, but the mission aligned with my growing conviction that education was the most powerful lever for change. 3 years later, when that startup was acquired by a larger company, my equity stake provided the initial capital to launch my own venture. EduTech Solutions began in a tiny office with just 2 employees, myself and a brilliant developer I'd met during my undergraduate years. We created affordable learning management systems for under-resourced schools, designed to make technology accessible to students regardless of their district's budget constraints. The business model was challenging. Our target clients had limited funds, and our commitment to accessibility meant keeping prices low. But our timing was perfect, coinciding with increased national attention on educational technology. By year 5, EduTech Solutions had expanded to 30 employees and was serving schools in 12 states. The growth attracted attention from investors, including David Reynolds, who would later become my husband. Unlike other potential funders who saw only profit margins, David recognized the deeper purpose driving our work. "You're not just building a company," he'd said during our first meeting. "You're creating an ecosystem that could transform educational access." His insight had been accurate. EduTech Solutions wasn't merely selling software. We were developing a comprehensive approach to technological equity in education. When an industry giant offered to acquire the company 7 years after its founding, the decision wasn't easy. The acquisition would provide resources to scale our solutions nationally, but I worried about maintaining our mission under corporate ownership. In the end, carefully negotiated terms preserved the company's core values while providing me with the financial freedom to establish the Reynolds Foundation. The foundation would continue the work that EduTech had begun, but with a broader mandate, and the independence that came from philanthropic rather than commercial structures. All of this had occurred while Nathan was enjoying the handed-down leadership of our father's company. While I built something from nothing, he inherited a fully functioning operation with established clients, experienced staff, and substantial resources. The divergence in our paths couldn't have been more stark, one defined by struggle, innovation, and purpose, the other by privilege, complacency, and entitlement. Now, as I gathered my notes from the Axion presentation, the irony wasn't lost on me. The brother who had been given every advantage was now seeking help from the sister who had been denied even basic support. The company that my parents had prioritized above my education was now failing, while the foundation born from my forced independence was thriving. Yet sitting in that boardroom, I felt no satisfaction in Nathan's struggle. The goal had never been to prove my family wrong, but to create something meaningful despite their lack of faith. The Reynolds Foundation existed not as a rebuke to their dismissal, but as a testament to the potential they had failed to recognize, not just in me, but in countless young people who lacked traditional advantages. Zara returned, collecting the extra presentation materials left behind. "That was intense," she observed carefully. "I didn't realize you had a personal connection to Axion." "An old connection," I clarified. "It won't affect our decision." She nodded, accepting this at face value, one of the reasons I valued her. "The committee meets tomorrow at 10. Based on the evaluation criteria, I don't see how we could approve this grant. Their proposal simply doesn't align with our mission or meet our standards." She was right, of course. The Axion proposal was fundamentally flawed, less about educational access and more about corporate survival disguised as philanthropy. No amount of personal history could change that reality. I gathered my notes, thinking about the path that had led me here. After being denied my college fund, I'd worked 3 jobs to put myself through community college, then earned scholarships to complete my degree. My first tech venture had failed spectacularly, but taught me invaluable lessons. The second had succeeded beyond expectations, allowing me to sell it and establish the foundation with the proceeds. Every step had been harder than it should have been, but each challenge had built the resilience that now defined both me and my organization. My phone buzzed with a message from David, checking if we were still on for dinner with the governor's education advisor. Life continuing in its established rhythm despite this unexpected collision with my past. I confirmed our dinner plans and closed my portfolio, ready to move on to the next meeting. But Nathan's final words lingered. I was wrong. We all were. 20 years too late, but still. The acknowledgement was something I hadn't realized I still needed. Tomorrow, the grant committee would evaluate Axion's proposal alongside dozens of others. The decision would be made on merit, not history. That was the foundation I had built, one of fairness, opportunity, and forward momentum. I could offer Nathan nothing less and nothing more. Beyond the gleaming windows of my office, the city stretched out in a landscape of possibility. Somewhere in that urban expanse were thousands of young people facing their own versions of the barriers I had encountered. Financial constraints, familial expectations, societal limitations. The Reynolds Foundation existed for them, not as a vehicle for personal vindication. As I prepared for my next meeting, I thought about how perspectives can shift dramatically over time. The practical decision my parents had made, investing in their son's education rather than their daughter's, had ultimately proven short-sighted. By forcing me to forge my own path, they had inadvertently helped create a strength and determination that might have remained dormant under more comfortable circumstances. This wasn't to say their actions had been justified or that hardship was necessary for success. Rather, it was a recognition that our greatest challenges sometimes reveal our most profound capabilities. The resilience born from necessity had shaped not just my career trajectory, but my fundamental approach to opportunity and access. As I navigated the rest of my day, a donor meeting, a program review, preparation for tomorrow's grant committee, I found myself reflecting on the cyclical nature of advantage and opportunity. Nathan had begun with every advantage, but squandered it through complacency. I had started with every disadvantage, but leveraged it into purpose. The sight of Nathan's face as he recognized me had been a moment 20 years in the making, though I'd never actually planned it. Life has a way of creating intersections we never anticipate, bringing past and present together in ways that force us to confront what we've become and what we've left behind. 2 days after the Axion presentation, I sat in my home office, reviewing the grant committee's preliminary evaluations. Their assessment confirmed what I already knew. Axion's proposal failed to meet our basic criteria on multiple levels. The technology was outdated, the implementation plan was vague, and the budget allocations were inconsistent with our requirements. But more fundamentally, the proposal lacked genuine commitment to educational access. It read like what it was: a desperate attempt to secure funding from any available source. My phone rang. The Foundation's head of program evaluation, Marcus Chen. "I've completed the site visit at Axion's development facility," he reported without preamble. Marcus had been with me since the Foundation's early days, and his assessments were always brutally honest. "It's worse than their proposal suggests. They've downsized their technical team to skeletal staff. The prototypes they showed us are essentially non-functional mock-ups. Their claimed relationships with educational partners couldn't be verified." I made notes as he continued his assessment, each point more damning than the last. The picture that emerged wasn't just of a flawed grant proposal, but of a company in free fall, grasping at any potential financial lifeline. "Their CEO asked to speak with you privately," Marcus added as he concluded his report. "I told him all communication should go through proper channels, but he was insistent. Nathan, of course he would try to leverage our connection, now that he knew who I was." "Thank you, Marcus. Your report is very helpful. I'll handle any communication from the CEO." After ending the call, I sat with the decision that now seemed inevitable. Axion's proposal would be rejected. The committee would make it official tomorrow, but the evaluation scores left no room for debate. The company my father had built, that Nathan had inherited, would need to find another path to survival. My husband David entered with fresh coffee, placing a mug beside my laptop. After 20 years together, he still remembered these small gestures during difficult moments. "Nathan?" he asked simply, noticing the evaluation report on my screen. "The committee's rejecting their proposal," I confirmed. "It's not even close to meeting our criteria." David sat across from me, his expression thoughtful. He'd heard the stories of my family, had held me through the nightmares that followed my father's funeral, understood better than anyone how complex this intersection of past and present truly was. "And how do you feel about that?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. Professionally, it's the only responsible decision. Their proposal doesn't meet our standards, and approving it would undermine everything the Foundation stands for. I paused. "Personally, it's complicated." David nodded, understanding as always. "He's asked to meet with me," I added. "Privately." My husband raised an eyebrow but didn't immediately object. "Do you want to?" That was the question, wasn't it? Did I want to speak with Nathan outside the formal evaluation process? What purpose would it serve beyond reopening old wounds? "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Part of me wants to avoid it entirely. But another part needs closure," David finished for me. 20 years is a long time to carry those questions. He was right. Despite my success, despite building a life and organization that exceeded anything I could have imagined when I left home, some small part of me still wondered, why had it been so easy for them to dismiss me? Why had Nathan, who had once been my childhood defender, stood silent when it mattered most? My phone buzzed with a text message. "Nathan, please, 15 minutes. Coffee shop across from your office. No discussion of the grant, I promise." I showed the message to David, who shrugged slightly. "Your decision. But whatever you choose, remember that you're meeting him as equals now. Actually," he smiled slightly, "you're meeting him as his superior in every meaningful way." The observation wasn't meant to be cruel, just accurate, and it helped center me. I texted back, Tomorrow, 8 a.m., 15 minutes. The response came immediately. Thank you. That evening, memories I'd long suppressed flooded back. The childhood moments when Nathan had been not just my brother, but my ally. Before high school, before the competitiveness that our parents subtly encouraged, before his awareness of the gender-based advantages that would shape our divergent paths, I remembered our model rocket launches in the backyard, Nathan teaching me the principles of aerodynamics when I was only 8. How he'd defended me against neighborhood bullies, proudly telling everyone his sister was the smart one in the family. Somewhere along the way, that pride had transformed into something else, a distancing, a diminishment, an acceptance of our predetermined roles. The tipping point had been subtle. My perfect math scores that went unacknowledged while his average ones were celebrated. The science fair where my project won regional recognition but wasn't deemed important enough for our parents to attend. The gradual realization that in our family, my achievements were curiosities while Nathan's were investments. By the time the college fund decision was made, the groundwork had been laid for years. My parents hadn't made a sudden choice to prioritize Nathan's education. They had been preparing us both to accept that outcome all along. What had hurt most wasn't the decision itself, but Nathan's silent complicity, his willingness to benefit from my exclusion without questioning its fairness. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, selecting a quiet corner table with good sightlines to both the entrance and exit, a habit formed through years of high-stakes negotiations. Nathan arrived precisely at 8, looking somehow both better and worse than he had at our foundation meeting. Better dressed in a crisp suit that suggested he'd made an effort, worse in the deeper lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He spotted me immediately but hesitated at the counter, ordering before approaching my table. A delay tactic I recognized from childhood. Nathan gathering his thoughts before difficult conversations. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as he sat down, coffee in hand. "I know you have no reason to." I nodded, acknowledging both his gratitude and its accuracy. "You said this isn't about the grant proposal." "It isn't." He took a breath. "It's about an apology that's 20 years overdue." The directness surprised me. The Nathan I remembered would have circled the point, established context, controlled the narrative. This forthright approach was new. "When Dad decided to use your college fund for my business degree, I knew it was wrong," he continued. I told myself it was his decision to make, that I had no real power to change it. But the truth is, I benefited from the injustice, and I chose to accept that benefit without question. He looked directly at me now, the careful composure slipping. "I was a coward, Caroline, and I've been paying for that cowardice ever since." I maintained my neutral expression, though his words stirred something unexpected. Not satisfaction at his admission, but a strange relief that he at least acknowledged the reality of what had happened. "Is that why you're here? To clear your conscience?" My tone wasn't accusatory, just direct. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because seeing you at the foundation, understanding what you've built while I've been slowly destroying what was handed to me. It's forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew." He glanced down at his coffee, then back to me. "The grant committee will reject our proposal. I know that now. It deserves to be rejected. It's poorly conceived, inadequately planned, and transparently desperate. Just like most of my decisions over the past 5 years." The self-awareness was startling. This wasn't the entitled brother I remembered. "What happened to Axion?" I asked, professional curiosity momentarily overriding personal history. "Dad built a solid company." Nathan's laugh held no humor. "I happened to it. Overconfidence. Resistance to innovation. Hiring people who agreed with me instead of challenging my assumptions. By the time I recognized the problems, we were already falling behind competitors who embraced the changes I'd resisted." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The qualities my parents had dismissed in me, my questioning nature, my interest, In emerging technologies, my resistance to accepting conventional wisdom were exactly what Nathan had lacked as a leader. The company has good people, he continued. Engineers, developers, support staff who deserve better leadership than I've provided. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you. This caught my attention. I'm not in a position to approve grants that don't meet our criteria, Nathan. Even for family. I'm not asking for that, he said quickly. I'm asking for your advice. Not as the foundation director who rejected our proposal, but as the successful entrepreneur and leader you've become. If you were in my position, how would you save Axion? The question hung between us, bridging decades of separation with unexpected sincerity. This wasn't a manipulation tactic. It was genuine recognition of capabilities he'd once dismissed. I considered him for a long moment, weighing 20 years of justified resentment against the opportunity to finally be seen for what I was, not just successful, but worthy of that success. Axion's core technologies are outdated, I said, finally, shifting into the analytical mode that came naturally. But your infrastructure and client relationships still have value. If I were in your position, I'd pursue strategic partnerships with emerging tech companies that need established distribution channels. Leverage what you have, market presence and institutional credibility, to create pathways for innovations you haven't developed internally. Nathan was taking notes now, his expression focused in a way I'd never seen before. The education sector specifically? He asked. I nodded. It's where Axion still has name recognition, but you need genuine commitment, not just desperate pivoting. Educational technology isn't just a market segment, it's a responsibility. If you're not genuinely invested in improving access and outcomes, you'll fail, and you should. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, perhaps, of the underlying values that had driven my career choices. That's why your foundation rejected us, not just the technical flaws, but because we weren't authentically committed to the mission. Yes, I confirmed. Foundations fund partners, not just projects. We need to believe you'll carry the work forward with integrity, even when we're not watching. We talked for another 10 minutes, my professional analysis flowing more easily than I would have expected. Nathan listened with an intensity that suggested he was truly hearing me, perhaps for the first time. As our agreed 15 minutes came to a close, I gathered my things to leave. Caroline, he said as I stood, thank you. Not just for this advice, but for being willing to give it. I wouldn't have been so generous in your position. I considered this as I put on my coat. It's not generosity, Nathan. It's who I've always been, someone who sees potential and tries to nurture it, even when others don't see the value. The parallel to my own experience wasn't subtle, but it needed to be said. He nodded, understanding the gentle rebuke. One more question, he said as I turned to leave. If Axion follows your advice, develops authentic educational partnerships, and submits a new proposal next funding cycle, one that genuinely advances your foundation's mission, would you consider it fairly? I appreciated that he hadn't asked for special treatment, only fairness. Every proposal that meets our submission requirements receives fair evaluation, Nathan. Yours would be no different. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something equally valuable, professional respect that transcended our complicated history. Back at the foundation that afternoon, I joined the grant committee meeting where Axion's proposal was officially rejected, along with several others. The decision was unanimous and straightforward, based entirely on the established evaluation criteria. No mention was made of my personal connection to the company. It wasn't relevant to the assessment. Later that day, I received an email from Nathan. Thank you for your time this morning. Your insights were more valuable than any grant could have been. I've spent years running from the lessons you tried to teach me 20 years ago. I'm done running now. The message stirred complicated emotions. Not triumph or vindication, but a sense that perhaps both of us were finally free from patterns established in our childhood. Nathan from the entitled complacency that had been encouraged in him, me from the need to prove my worth to those who had dismissed it. That evening, I discussed the meeting with David over dinner, describing Nathan's unexpected humility and genuine request for guidance. People can change, David observed, though it usually takes something dramatic to catalyze it. Like watching your company collapse, I said, or seeing your sister succeed beyond anyone's expectations, he added gently. The observation gave me pause. Had my success been as transformative for Nathan as his failure had been? Had seeing me in that boardroom forced him to reconsider not just his assumptions about me, but about himself? Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about Nathan's question, how to save Axion. From a purely business perspective, the strategic partnerships I'd suggested were indeed their best option. But something else kept surfacing in my thoughts, the underlying purpose that had driven my own career. Education technology wasn't just an industry, it was a means to expand opportunity. Every decision I'd made, from founding EduTech Solutions to establishing the Reynolds Foundation, had been guided by that core purpose. Nathan had inherited a company, but not a mission. Without that anchor, his leadership had drifted with market trends and personal convenience. A month after our coffee shop meeting, I received a surprising call from Marcus Chen. He'd been approached by an innovative educational technology startup called Horizon Learning that was seeking strategic partnerships. Their technology was impressive. Adaptive learning algorithms that could customize educational content to individual learning styles, but they lacked distribution channels and institutional relationships. They mentioned Axion might be a potential partner, Marcus said. Apparently, they've had preliminary conversations. I thought you should know, given our recent evaluation. I thanked him for the information, curious about this development. Had Nathan taken my advice seriously? Was he actually pursuing the strategy I'd outlined? My curiosity was answered the next day when I received an industry newsletter announcing that Axion Technology was pivoting toward strategic partnerships in the education sector, leveraging its established infrastructure to support emerging innovations. The article quoted Nathan directly. We're returning to our roots as an education-focused company, but with a renewed commitment to technological advancement through collaboration rather than competition. The language was boilerplate, but between the lines I could see the strategy taking shape. Nathan was repositioning Axion not as a direct competitor in the crowded edtech space, but as an enabler for emerging innovations, exactly the approach I had suggested. That evening, I found myself on Axion's website, looking for evidence of this new direction. The transformation was already visible. A redesigned interface highlighting partnership opportunities, and a new mission statement emphasizing collaborative innovation for educational advancement. Most intriguing was a section titled Educational Access Initiative, describing a program to bring advanced learning technologies to under-resourced schools, the very constituency the Reynolds Foundation had been serving for years. Was this genuine commitment or strategic positioning? Only time would tell, but the speed and comprehensiveness of these changes suggested Nathan was at least serious about the pivot. 2 days later, I received another email from him, not asking for anything, but sharing an article about educational inequality in rural communities. Thought this might interest you, he wrote. The challenges described here align with what your foundation has been addressing. If Axion's new partnerships gain traction, perhaps we can contribute to solutions in this space as well. The message was carefully crafted, acknowledging the foundation's work without making presumptions, suggesting potential alignment without pushing for collaboration. It was the approach of someone who recognized boundaries while leaving doors open for possible future connection. I forwarded the article to our research team with a note to include its insights in our upcoming strategy review, but didn't respond. Directly to Nathan, Our professional interaction had been necessary and productive, but I wasn't ready for casual correspondence. The wounds of the past hadn't disappeared, even if they had begun to heal. 3 months later, Nathan's strategic pivot began showing results. Industry publications reported that Axion had formalized partnerships with 3 emerging edtech companies, providing them with distribution infrastructure while integrating their innovations into Axion's existing platforms. The most significant of these partnerships was with Horizon Learning, whose adaptive technology was now being implemented in school districts where Axion had established relationships. More surprisingly, Axion had established a scholarship program for students from low-income backgrounds pursuing degrees in education technology, a direct investment in the talent pipeline they would need for sustainable innovation. When Marcus Year brought this development to my attention, his skepticism was evident. "Convenient timing," he observed. "Setting up programs that align with our funding priorities right after being rejected." His suspicion was reasonable, but something about the scholarship program's structure gave me pause. It wasn't just window dressing or strategic positioning, it was thoughtfully designed with mentorship components and internship opportunities that reflected genuine commitment to developing talent from underrepresented communities. "Keep me updated," I told Marcus. "I'm interested to see if these initiatives maintain momentum or fade once they've served their PR purpose." 6 months after our coffee shop meeting, I received an invitation to speak at an education technology conference where Nathan was also scheduled to present. The organizers, unaware of our connection, had placed our sessions on consecutive days, focusing on complementary themes: my talk on philanthropic approaches to educational access, his on corporate responsibility in the edtech sector. The synchronicity was striking, our professional paths converging after decades of separation. I accepted the invitation, curious about how Nathan was positioning Axion's transformation to the broader industry. The industry conference was held at the San Francisco Convention Center, a gleaming glass structure overlooking the bay. I arrived early on the second day, partly to prepare for my afternoon keynote, and partly to observe Nathan's morning presentation without him knowing I was there. Slipping into the back of the auditorium just as he was being introduced, I was struck by how different he looked from our coffee shop meeting 6 months earlier. Gone was the desperate tension, replaced by a focused energy that reminded me of our father in his better days. He stood at the podium not as the entitled heir to Axion, but as a leader who had weathered a crisis and emerged with hard-earned wisdom. "My journey in educational technology began with privilege," he started, catching me off guard with his candor. "I inherited a company rather than building one. I assumed leadership was my birthright rather than a responsibility to be earned. Those assumptions nearly destroyed Axion, and more importantly, they betrayed our mission to expand educational opportunity through technology." The audience, largely composed of industry veterans who had witnessed Axion's decline and recent resurgence, listened with rapt attention. Nathan wasn't offering corporate platitudes. He was providing a case study in failure and redemption. 6 months ago, Axion was on the verge of collapse, he continued. Our technology was outdated, our approach was obsolete, and our commitment to educational advancement had become secondary to survival. We had lost sight of a fundamental truth: that meaningful innovation doesn't happen in isolation. It emerges from collaboration, from recognizing that no single company or individual has all the answers. As he outlined Axion's transformation through strategic partnerships and renewed commitment to educational access, I found myself unexpectedly moved. Nathan wasn't just implementing the strategy I'd suggested. He was embracing the underlying philosophy that had guided my own career, the belief that technology should serve as a bridge to opportunity rather than a barrier. "Our new scholarship program isn't corporate philanthropy," he emphasized, addressing the skepticism that had initially colored my own reaction. "It's recognition that innovation requires diverse perspectives, especially from communities that have been systematically excluded from technological advancement. By investing in students from underrepresented backgrounds, we're not just doing good. We're ensuring that future educational technologies will address the needs of all learners, not just those with existing advantages. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't strategic positioning. It was genuine conviction born from hard experience. After his presentation, Nathan fielded questions with a thoughtfulness I'd never seen in him before. When asked about Axion's financial recovery, he refused to frame it as a success story. "We're stable now, but stability isn't the goal," he said. "We're rebuilding with purpose, measuring progress not by profit margins alone, but by the number of students, gaining access to educational opportunities through our technologies. That's a longer and more challenging journey, but ultimately a more meaningful one." As the session ended and the audience dispersed, I remained in my seat, processing what I'd witnessed. This version of Nathan, humble, purpose-driven, sincere, seemed almost like a different person from the brother who had accepted his advantage at my expense, who had watched silently as my educational dreams were dismissed. I slipped out before he could see me, needing time to reconcile this new Nathan with the one who had shaped so much of my past. Walking along the convention center's waterfront path, I found myself grappling with complicated emotions. There was pride in seeing him embrace the values I had always championed, satisfaction that he had found a more meaningful path, but also a lingering sadness for all the years lost to the patterns established in our youth. By the time I delivered my own keynote that afternoon, Beyond Charity, Philanthropic Investment in Educational Equity, I had regained my professional focus. My talk addressed the systemic barriers that limited educational access and the responsibility of foundations to fund structural change rather than superficial interventions. As I outlined the Reynolds Foundation's approach to measuring impact beyond immediate outcomes, emphasizing long-term transformation of educational systems, I noticed Nathan slip into the back of the auditorium. He hadn't known I would be speaking, judging by his surprised expression. But once there, he listened with the same intensity he had shown during our coffee shop conversation. Our eyes met briefly during the Q&A session. He nodded slightly, a gesture of respect between colleagues rather than recognition between siblings. I returned the nod, acknowledging this new dynamic. Two professionals in the same field, approaching similar challenges from different vantage points. After my presentation, as attendees gathered in small groups for discussion, Nathan approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance until I indicated he was welcome. "That was illuminating," he said simply. "The Foundation's approach to systemic change rather than symptom management. It's challenging conventional philanthropic models in important ways." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the professional compliment for what it was. "Your morning session was equally thought-provoking. The partnership strategy seems to be gaining traction." This careful exchange, focused entirely on our professional work rather than personal history, felt like tentative steps on new ground. Neither the antagonism of our childhood competition nor the raw emotion of our coffee shop reconciliation, but something more balanced. A recognition of each other as competent professionals with valuable perspectives. "Would you have time for dinner this evening?" he asked, his tone making clear this was a genuine question rather than a presumption. "To discuss potential alignments between Axion's new direction and the Foundation's work?" "Strictly professional," he added quickly. I considered the invitation, weighing professional opportunity against personal caution. "I have a Foundation dinner this evening with major donors," I replied. "But I could meet for breakfast tomorrow, before the closing sessions." "That would be excellent," he said, clearly pleased but careful not to overreach. We arranged to meet at the hotel restaurant at 7:30 the following morning, exchanging contact information as any conference colleagues might. That evening at the Foundation dinner, surrounded by supporters who had helped build the Reynolds Foundation, over 15 years I found my thoughts drifting to the contrast between Nathan's inherited advantage and my hard-won success. The donors gathered here Technology entrepreneurs, education advocates, community leaders had recognized the foundation's value through demonstrable impact rather than family connection. Their support was earned through results, not assumed, through birthright. David noticed my momentary distraction during a conversation about our latest initiative to bridge the digital divide in rural schools. "Nathan?" he asked quietly when we had a private moment. "He's different," I admitted. "Not just strategically repositioning Axion, but fundamentally rethinking his approach to leadership and purpose. It's unexpected." "People can grow," David observed, "especially when circumstances force them to confront their limitations. The question is whether the growth is circumstantial or transformational." His insight, as always, cut to the heart of my hesitation. Was Nathan's change a temporary adaptation to crisis or a genuine evolution? Only time would reveal the answer, but our breakfast meeting might provide additional clues. The hotel restaurant was quietly elegant, with panoramic views of the bay. I arrived precisely at 7:30 to find Nathan already seated, reviewing materials, on his tablet with focused attention. He rose when he saw me, the gesture automatic but sincere. "I've been looking at the Foundation's recent grant recipients," he said as I settled across from him. "The pattern is clear. You're prioritizing innovations that scale without sacrificing personalization. Technology that adapts to learner needs rather than forcing learners to adapt to technological limitations." His analysis was accurate, demonstrating that he had done his homework beyond merely checking our website. "That's been our focus for the past 3 funding cycles," I confirmed. "Mass customization is the frontier in educational technology, making advanced learning tools responsive to individual learning styles and needs while maintaining affordability and scalability." As we ordered breakfast, our conversation flowed with surprising ease, focused on the technical and strategic challenges of educational technology. Nathan shared insights from Axion's new partnerships, particularly the implementation challenges they were encountering in resource-limited school districts. I offered perspectives from the Foundation's research on technology integration in diverse educational environments. For nearly an hour, we engaged as colleagues with shared professional interests, the weight of our personal history temporarily set aside. It was only when the conversation turned to Axion's scholarship program that our familial connection resurfaced. "The structure of the program was inspired by your journey," Nathan admitted. "Not the Foundation's model, but your personal path. Building success despite having educational support withdrawn. I wanted to create opportunities for students facing similar barriers, though obviously through institutional support rather than abandoned vulnerability." The reference to our shared past shifted the atmosphere, bringing personal dimensions back into what had been a comfortably professional exchange. "The scholarship is thoughtfully designed," I acknowledged. "The mentorship component particularly distinguishes it from typical corporate initiatives. That was lesson learned from watching the Foundation's approach," he said. "Financial support alone doesn't address systemic barriers. Students from underrepresented backgrounds need networks, guidance, and institutional advocacy, the very resources that privilege typically provides automatically." His understanding of these dynamics reflected a depth of thought that went beyond strategic positioning. This wasn't just Nathan adopting the language of opportunity. He had genuinely engaged with the complexities of educational inequality. "Caroline," he said after a moment's hesitation, "I've been thinking about approaching the Foundation regarding a potential collaboration, not a grant application, but a programmatic partnership combining Axion's distribution channels with the Foundation's expertise in educational equity. Would that be something your team might consider evaluating?" The question was carefully framed, professional rather than presumptive, acknowledging proper channels rather than leveraging personal connection. It was exactly how any respectful potential partner would approach the Foundation. We have an established process for reviewing partnership proposals, I replied. All submissions receive thorough evaluation based on alignment with our mission, evidence of commitment to educational equity, and capacity for meaningful impact. The program committee makes recommendations to the board quarterly. Of course, he said, accepting the formal response without pushback. I wouldn't expect or want special consideration. If we proceed with a submission, it should be evaluated on its merits alone. As we concluded breakfast and prepared to return to the conference, Nathan hesitated, then spoke with unexpected vulnerability. I've been thinking a lot about paths not taken. If our parents had supported your education instead of prioritizing mine, how different both our lives might have been. You would have started with advantages instead of barriers. I would have learned self-reliance instead of entitlement. The observation held no self-pity, just honest reflection. And yet here we are, I replied, both working in educational technology, approaching similar challenges from different vantage points. Perhaps not the paths either of us would have predicted, but meaningful ones nonetheless. He nodded, accepting this perspective. The conference organizers had no idea we were siblings when they scheduled our consecutive sessions, did they? None, I confirmed. The alignment was coincidental, though perhaps fitting given the convergence in our professional focus. Life has strange symmetries sometimes, he observed as we walked toward the elevator. Thank you for breakfast, Caroline, and for your willingness to consider Axion as a potential professional partner, despite our complicated history. Back at the foundation the following week, I mentioned the conversation to Marcus during our program development meeting. His skepticism remained evident. Convenient timing, he noted. Axion pivots toward educational equity just as they're facing financial collapse, then seeks partnership with the very foundation that rejected their grant application. The strategy is transparent. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but strategy and sincerity aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Nathan's approach to educational access shows genuine understanding of systemic barriers and thoughtful commitment to addressing them. Whether that understanding preceded Axion's crisis or emerged from it doesn't diminish its potential value. Marcus had been with me long enough to recognize when my mind was opening to possibilities he considered dubious. You're considering their partnership proposal if they submit one, he said, not quite a question. I'm considering having the program committee evaluate any proposal they submit according to our established criteria, I clarified. Personal history aside, Axion's distribution network reaches schools we've struggled to connect with, particularly in rural districts. If their commitment to educational equity is genuine, there might be programmatic alignment worth exploring. Marcus nodded, accepting this perspective while maintaining his reservation. Just be careful that personal reconciliation doesn't cloud professional judgment. Family dynamics have a way of infiltrating even the most carefully maintained boundaries. His caution was warranted. The shifting relationship with Nathan, from childhood competitor to adulthood adversary to potential professional ally, created emotional complexities that could indeed influence decision-making. Recognizing this risk was the first step in managing it. 3 weeks later, Axion submitted a formal partnership proposal to the foundation. The submission followed all standard protocols, requesting no expedited review or special consideration. The proposed collaboration would integrate the foundation's equity-focused assessment tools with Axion's learning management systems, creating analytics that could help schools identify and address opportunity gaps for underserved students. The proposal was thorough, demonstrating clear understanding of educational inequalities and offering concrete mechanisms for addressing structural barriers. Most notably, it acknowledged the foundation's expertise in equity-centered design and positioned Axion as the implementation partner rather than the programmatic leader, a humility unusual in corporate submissions. I recused myself from the initial evaluation, assigning Marcus to lead the assessment team, making clear that the proposal should receive the same rigorous review as any other submission. Evaluate it strictly on programmatic merit and mission. Alignment, I instructed. If family connection becomes relevant, I'll remove myself from the decision process entirely. While the proposal underwent review, Nathan maintained professional distance, making no attempt to influence the process through personal outreach. This restraint further suggested his commitment to establishing a legitimate partnership rather than leveraging familial connection. The evaluation committee's preliminary assessment was cautiously positive. The technical integration is well conceived, Marcus reported during our mid-cycle review. Axion's learning management system provides a viable platform for implementing the Foundation's equity assessment tools at scale. Their distribution channels would significantly expand our reach in rural and under-resourced districts. And the commitment indicators? I asked, referring to our metrics for evaluating potential partners' genuine engagement with educational equity. Mixed but trending positive, he admitted. The scholarship program demonstrates authentic commitment. The restructured leadership team includes educators from diverse backgrounds who bring first-hand experience with educational barriers. The partnership terms protect against commercial exploitation of Foundation resources. He paused. However, the transformation is recent, with limited track record for sustainability. The question is whether these changes represent fundamental evolution or crisis adaptation. This assessment echoed David's earlier observation about circumstantial versus transformational growth, the very question that had been lingering in my mind since witnessing Nathan's conference presentation. "What's your recommendation?" I asked, valuing Marcus's unvarnished perspective. "Conditional approval," he said after careful consideration. "A limited pilot implementation with clear performance metrics and staged expansion based on demonstrated commitment. Trust but verify, essentially." The approach was sound, acknowledging the potential value of the partnership, while establishing safeguards against superficial commitment. It was how we would approach any promising but unproven collaboration. As the evaluation process continued, I focused on other Foundation initiatives, including a major expansion of our Rural Technology Access Program and a new research project examining the impact of artificial intelligence on educational equity. These core activities provided healthy distance from the Axion proposal, allowing the evaluation to proceed without my direct involvement. 2 months after the initial submission, the program committee delivered its final recommendation: approval of a limited partnership pilot focusing on 3 school districts where Axion had established relationships, but the Foundation had minimal presence. The implementation would include quarterly reviews and clear metrics for evaluating both technical integration and equity impact. The recommendation came to the board for final approval, with my participation limited to presenting the committee's assessment rather than advocating for a specific outcome. The board's discussion was thorough, examining both opportunities and risks with appropriate caution. This partnership represents potential expansion of our equity tools to communities we've struggled to reach, noted Dr. Eliza Washington, our education policy expert. If Axion's commitment is genuine, the impact could be substantial for students in these districts. But if their commitment wavers when financial pressures ease, we risk association with superficial equity work, countered James Chen, our technology advisor. The Foundation's reputation is built on authentic engagement with educational barriers. The deliberation continued, weighing potential benefits against possible risks, eventually arriving at qualified approval, a 1-year pilot with comprehensive evaluation before any expansion could be considered. As I left the boardroom after the vote, I felt a complex mixture of professional satisfaction and personal uncertainty. The partnership had potential to advance the Foundation's mission in meaningful ways, but the intertwining of professional purpose with family reconciliation created emotional complications I was still learning to navigate. That evening, I called Nathan to officially inform him of the board's decision. Our conversation remained professional, focused on implementation timeline and performance expectations. Yet underlying the procedural details was an unspoken recognition of how far we had both traveled from that devastating family dinner 20 years earlier. "The Foundation's standards are exacting," Nathan acknowledged as we concluded the call. "We understand the responsibility of this partnership and the importance of demonstrating sustained commitment beyond initial implementation. The program, THI. Team will be in touch to coordinate next steps," I replied, maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. "They'll establish the evaluation framework and reporting expectations." As we said goodbye, Nathan added, "Thank you, Caroline, not just for the partnership opportunity, but for the second chance it represents, professionally and perhaps, eventually, personally as well." The comment acknowledged the dual dimensions of our reconnection without presuming resolution of our complicated history. It was the right note. Hopeful but not assuming. Grateful but not entitled. The following weeks brought focused planning for the partnership launch, with teams from both organizations developing implementation protocols and evaluation metrics. I maintained appropriate distance from the operational details, allowing program staff to establish working relationships without the complications of family dynamics. As the pilot launch approached, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought us to this point. From the brother who had silently accepted advantage at my expense to the professional partner seeking to leverage his company's resources for educational equity. The transformation seemed genuine, but only sustained commitment would truly prove its depth. The resilience that had carried me from abandoned educational dreams to founding an influential foundation now served a new purpose. Navigating the complex intersection of professional purpose and personal reconciliation, the path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time in 20 years, it held possibilities for healing as well as impact. Perhaps that was the ultimate lesson in this unexpected chapter. That purpose could create bridges across even the most difficult terrain, that shared commitment to expanding opportunity could begin to heal wounds created by its denial, that the future need not be constrained by the limitations of the past. The pilot partnership launched in 3 school districts, one rural Appalachian community, one urban district with predominantly immigrant families, and one Native American reservation school system. Each represented different challenges in educational access, requiring thoughtful adaptation of both Axion's technology and the Foundation's equity frameworks. I watched the implementation from an appropriate distance, receiving regular updates but allowing the program teams to collaborate. Without my direct involvement, this professional boundary was important, not just for objective evaluation, but for my own emotional equilibrium as I continued processing the evolving relationship with Nathan. 3 months into the pilot, Marcus requested a meeting to discuss preliminary findings. His typically cautious demeanor had shifted to something approaching enthusiasm, a rare occurrence that immediately caught my attention. "The integration is working better than anticipated," he reported, sliding a data dashboard across my desk. "Axion's technical team has been exceptionally responsive to implementation challenges, and their community engagement specialists have established meaningful relationships with local educators." The dashboard displayed early metrics from the 3 pilot districts, teacher adoption rates exceeding projections, student engagement showing promising patterns, and most significantly, narrowing performance gaps among historically underserved populations. "The reservation schools are particularly noteworthy," Marcus continued. "Axion's team worked directly with tribal education leaders to adapt both technology interfaces and assessment frameworks to reflect cultural contexts. It's not superficial customization. They've integrated indigenous knowledge systems and learning approaches into the platform architecture. This level of authentic engagement went beyond what we typically saw from corporate partners, suggesting a depth of commitment that couldn't be explained by mere strategic positioning." "Nathan has been directly involved?" I asked, maintaining professional tone despite my personal curiosity. "Extensively," Marcus confirmed. "He's visited all 3 districts multiple times, not for photo opportunities, but for working sessions with educators and community leaders. He's been hands-on with adaptation challenges, particularly in the reservation schools. The picture emerging was of a leader fully engaged with the substantive work of educational equity, not merely delegating corporate social responsibility to subordinates. This aligned with the transformation I had glimpsed at the conference but went further, demonstrating sustained commitment beyond public presentation. The quarterly review is scheduled for next month, Marcus noted. Based on these preliminary findings, I'm inclined to recommend proceeding with the next implementation phase. The data supports expansion to additional districts if the trends continue. Coming from Marcus, who had been the most skeptical about Axion's genuine commitment, this assessment carried particular weight. I thanked him for the update, promising to review the detailed metrics before the formal evaluation. That evening, I shared the preliminary findings with David over dinner, my measured professional analysis gradually yielding to more personal reflection. It appears Nathan is approaching this partnership with genuine commitment, I acknowledged. The adaptation work in the reservation schools particularly demonstrates authentic engagement with equity challenges. David, who had witnessed my complicated journey with Nathan from painful estrangement to cautious professional reconnection, considered this carefully. "Do you think he's trying to prove something to you specifically?" he asked. "Or has he genuinely embraced these values independently?" The question cut to the heart of my lingering uncertainty. Was Nathan's transformation authentic or performative? Was he seeking my approval, or genuinely committed to educational equity regardless of our personal history? "I'm not sure it matters ultimately," I replied after thoughtful consideration. If students benefit from expanded educational access, if teachers gain better tools for addressing opportunity gaps, if communities previously marginalized in technological advancement find genuine partnership, the impact is real regardless of what motivates it. Yet even as I said this, I recognized that motivation did matter, not just for sustainability, but for the integrity of our tentative personal reconciliation. A transformation driven solely by crisis adaptation or approval seeking would likely falter when circumstances changed. Only genuine evolution in values would sustain commitment through inevitable challenges. The quarterly review session brought representatives from both organizations together to assess progress and refine implementation strategies. As Foundation President, I participated in an oversight capacity, maintaining appropriate professional focus despite the personal dimensions hovering beneath the surface. Nathan led the Axion team, presenting their technical adaptations with a nuanced understanding of equity challenges that reflected genuine engagement rather than superficial adoption of inclusion language. The integration of the Foundation's assessment frameworks with Axion's learning management systems had required significant architectural modifications, demonstrating institutional commitment beyond token cooperation. Most compelling were the video testimonials from educators in the pilot districts, particularly a Lakota language teacher from the reservation school who described how the adapted platform had transformed cultural preservation efforts. "For the first time," she explained, "we have technology that respects indigenous knowledge systems rather than forcing our teaching into Western frameworks. The students see their culture reflected in the tools they're using, not just in superficial design elements but in the fundamental structure of learning pathways." This level of impact, technology serving cultural preservation rather than technological assimilation, represented exactly the kind of transformative approach the Foundation had been working toward for years. That Axion had embraced this philosophy so thoroughly in partnership implementation suggested a deeper commitment than strategic repositioning alone could explain. During the working lunch that followed, Nathan and I found ourselves momentarily alone as other team members engaged in technical discussions at the opposite end of the conference room. The reservation school implementation exceeded my expectations, I acknowledged, maintaining professional tone while offering genuine recognition. "Mine as well," Nathan replied. Working with the Tribal Education Council transformed my understanding of what educational technology should be. They challenged fundamental assumptions about knowledge systems and learning pathways that I'd never even questioned. There was an authenticity in his reflection that resonated with my own professional journey. The humility of recognizing that expertise often comes from communities traditionally excluded from technological development, not just from industry, credentials, or academic backgrounds. That's been the Foundation's core philosophy from the beginning, I noted. That effective educational innovation requires diverse perspectives, particularly from communities that have been systematically marginalized in technological advancement. Nathan nodded, acknowledging this alignment. I understand now why the grant committee rejected our original proposal. We were approaching educational technology as a delivery system rather than a collaborative framework. The difference is fundamental. This recognition, that rejection had been based on substantive assessment rather than personal history, represented important validation of the Foundation's integrity and my own professional boundaries. The quarterly review concluded with formal recommendation to proceed with the next implementation phase, expanding to 5 additional districts while maintaining intensive support for the initial pilot sites. The evaluation metrics showed promising impact on educational access and achievement gaps, with particularly strong results for students who had been historically underserved by traditional educational technologies. As the meeting dispersed, Nathan approached with professional courtesy. My team mentioned you'll be speaking at the National Education Technology Conference next month. Axion is sponsoring the equity panel on the second day. I wondered if you might consider participating to discuss the partnership implementation from the Foundation's perspective. The invitation was professionally appropriate given our collaboration, yet still navigated carefully around our personal history. I'll need to check my schedule, I replied, maintaining appropriate boundaries. The Foundation's communications team coordinates all speaking engagements. Of course, he acknowledged immediately. Just thought I'd mention it directly since we're both here. The formal invitation will come through proper channels. 6 weeks later, I found myself on that panel, seated beside Nathan and educational leaders from 2 of our pilot districts, discussing the challenges and opportunities in equity-centered technological implementation. The professional dynamic between us had evolved into something resembling collaborative respect, not the strained politeness of our initial Foundation meeting, nor the tentative reconnection of our conference encounter, but a more balanced interaction based on shared purpose and demonstrated commitment. As Nathan described Axion's evolution toward equity-centered design, I was struck by how thoroughly he had integrated the core principles that had guided my own career. This wasn't superficial adoption of inclusion language, but fundamental rethinking of technological development processes. Our greatest mistake was assuming we knew what communities needed without meaningful engagement, he explained in response to a moderator question. We approached educational technology as something we created and delivered, rather than something we developed in partnership with the educators and students who would actually use it. That fundamental misconception limited both our impact and our innovation. When the moderator asked about the Foundation's decision to partner with Axion despite their previous grant rejection, I responded with professional clarity. The Reynolds Foundation evaluates all potential partnerships based on demonstrated commitment to educational equity, capacity for meaningful impact, and alignment with our mission of expanding technological access to underserved communities. Axion's transformation from technology provider to collaborative partner, particularly their work with Indigenous educators to develop culturally responsive learning systems, demonstrated the kind of authentic engagement we seek in implementation. Partners. The response was truthful while maintaining appropriate boundaries around our personal history, focusing on institutional alignment rather than familial reconciliation. After the panel, as attendees gathered in small discussion groups, I found myself approached by a young woman who introduced herself as one of Axion's scholarship recipients, a computer science major from the same rural community where one of our pilot programs was implemented. "Mr. Morgan mentioned you were the inspiration behind the scholarship program," she said, "that your journey showed how determination could overcome educational barriers and how important institutional support is for students facing similar challenges." The reference caught me off guard. Not just that Nathan had shared something of our history with the scholarship recipients, but that he had framed my experience as inspirational rather than as a family failing. "The scholarship has been life-changing," she continued. "Not just the financial support, but the mentorship network and internship opportunities. I'll be working with the development team on the reservation school adaptations this summer, bringing my own rural education experience to the technical implementations." As she described her anticipated contributions to the project, I saw the multiplying impact of opportunity extended rather than denied, how investments in potential created ripple effects through communities and systems. This young woman would bring insights from her own educational journey to technology development that would benefit countless students facing similar barriers. Later that evening at the conference reception, Nathan approached with characteristic professional courtesy. "Your panel contributions were insightful," he observed, "particularly your emphasis on community leadership in technological adaptation. It's been the guiding principle in our implementation approach." "The outcomes reflect that commitment," I acknowledged, "particularly in the reservation schools. The language preservation work is extraordinary." We maintained this professionally, focused conversation for several minutes before Nathan shifted to a more personal tone. "I met your scholarship recipient," I noted. "She mentioned you've shared something of our history with the students." He nodded, looking momentarily uncomfortable. "I hope that wasn't inappropriate. I've found that being honest about my own journey, including the unearned advantages I received and my failure to recognize their impact, helps create authentic mentorship relationships with the scholars. They face barriers I never experienced, but should have recognized and challenged." The explanation reflected the same humble self-awareness I had glimpsed during his conference presentation months earlier. This wasn't performative accountability, but genuine reckoning with privilege and its responsibilities. "The scholarship program is making meaningful impact," I offered. Her excitement about contributing to the reservation school implementation was particularly notable. "That's entirely her initiative," Nathan said with evident pride. She recognized connection points between rural educational challenges and reservation school adaptations that none of our developers had identified. She'll bring invaluable perspective to the team. As the reception continued around us, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically circumstances had shifted since our confrontation in the foundation boardroom a year earlier. The brother who had once accepted advantage at my expense was now creating opportunities for students facing similar barriers, approaching educational technology with the very values I had championed throughout my career. The Foundation's annual Impact Report, published 6 months into the Axion partnership, highlighted preliminary outcomes from the pilot implementation. The data showed promising results across all 3 initial districts, with particularly strong impact in the reservation schools, where cultural preservation and educational advancement were being integrated rather than positioned as competing priorities. The report included a brief case study of the partnership, describing how the Foundation's equity assessment frameworks combined with Axion's learning management systems had created new capabilities for identifying and addressing opportunity gaps. The narrative maintained appropriate professional focus, mentioning Nathan only in his capacity as Axion's CEO, without reference to our personal connection. As the pilot program expanded to additional districts, I maintained appropriate oversight, while delegating day-to-day implementation to the program team. This professional boundary remained important both for objective evaluation and for my own continuing process of reconciling the past with this evolving present. At the 1-year mark, the formal review confirmed the partnership's positive impact. with metrics exceeding projections across multiple dimensions. Teacher adoption rates, student engagement patterns, and most significantly, narrowing achievement gaps all indicated successful implementation with sustainable momentum. The board unanimously approved transition from pilot status to established program, with expanded implementation in 15 additional districts over the following 2 years. The decision was based entirely on performance metrics and programmatic alignment, with no reference to the personal history underlying the institutional partnership. Following the board's decision, I met with Nathan to discuss the partnership's future direction. The meeting was scheduled at a neutral location, a conference room at the university where we would both be speaking at an educational technology symposium, maintaining professional context while acknowledging the personal dimensions that continued to evolve beneath our institutional collaboration. The implementation data is compelling, I noted as we reviewed the comprehensive evaluation report, particularly the cultural adaptation frameworks developed with the reservation schools. Those approaches could transform educational technology in Indigenous communities nationally. That's been the most meaningful aspect of this work, Nathan acknowledged. Learning to truly listen to community wisdom rather than imposing technological solutions. It's transformed not just the implementation, but Axion's entire approach to development. His sincerity was evident, reflecting a leader who had genuinely embraced new values rather than strategically repositioned during crisis. The Foundation is considering establishing a dedicated funding stream for Indigenous education technology initiatives, I shared. The reservation school implementations have demonstrated approaches that deserve broader application. Axion would welcome opportunity to support that expansion, Nathan offered immediately. Not necessarily as an implementation partner, but perhaps in advisory capacity to share what we've learned about effective collaboration with tribal education councils. The offer reflected appropriate recognition of roles and boundaries, understanding that the Foundation might pursue these initiatives through various partnerships rather than assuming Axion's central involvement. This mature approach to institutional relationship further demonstrated Nathan's evolution from entitled expectation to collaborative engagement. As our meeting concluded and we prepared for our respective symposium presentations, Nathan hesitated, then spoke with careful consideration. "I've been reflecting on paths not taken," he said. "How different both our journeys might have been if our parents had made different choices 20 years ago. If they had supported your education instead of prioritizing mine." The observation opened space for more personal reflection than our previous interactions had allowed, acknowledging the family dynamics that had shaped both our estrangement and this tentative reconciliation. "I can't change the advantages I accepted without question," he continued, "but I can ensure they become catalysts for expanding opportunity rather than perpetuating exclusion. That's become my personal mission beyond corporate strategy, transforming unearned privilege into meaningful access for others." The commitment reflected genuine evolution rather than strategic positioning, a leader who had moved beyond crisis adaptation to purpose-driven transformation. The scholarship program, the partnership implementation, the work with Indigenous communities, they all demonstrate that commitment, I acknowledged. The impact metrics speak for themselves. As we walked toward the symposium venue, I found myself reflecting on how professional purpose had created pathway for personal healing, how shared commitment to educational equity had begun, bridging the painful gap created by its denial. The journey wasn't complete. 20 years of estrangement couldn't be erased by 1 year of collaboration. But the Foundation had been established for something neither of us could have anticipated when Nathan walked into my boardroom that pivotal day. The possibility of reconciliation through shared purpose rather than obligatory family connection. Later that evening, as I prepared my keynote address on educational technology's role in expanding opportunity, I found myself incorporating elements of my personal journey without explicitly referencing the family dynamics that had shaped it. The narrative focused instead on how barriers can sometimes become bridges, how being denied educational support had ultimately led to creating institutional structures that extended opportunity to others facing similar challenges. The most powerful response to having opportunities denied, I told the assembled educators and technology developers, isn't seeking validation from those who denied them, but creating new opportunities for others facing similar barriers. That's how individual setbacks transform into systemic progress, when personal determination evolves into institutional commitment. From my vantage point at the podium, I could see Nathan in the audience, listening with evident attention. Whether he recognized his role in the narrative remained unspoken, but the journey we had both traveled, from family estrangement to professional collaboration, embodied the very transformation I was describing. The greatest achievement wasn't proving my family wrong about my potential. It was proving myself right about education's power to transform lives when barriers are removed and opportunity extended. The Foundation's work, now amplified through partnership with the very company my parents had prioritized over my education, had created impact far beyond what either of us could have achieved in isolation. Perhaps that was the ultimate vindication. Not Nathan's acknowledgement of past wrongs, though that mattered, but the transformation of painful history into purposeful collaboration that expanded opportunity for students facing the very barriers I had encountered. The scholarship recipient I had met, now contributing her unique perspective to reservation school implementations, represented this multiplying impact. Opportunity extended, creating ripple effects through communities and systems. As I concluded my keynote, emphasizing technology's responsibility to expand access rather than reinforce exclusion, I found myself offering closing thoughts that addressed not just the professional audience, but my own continuing journey of reconciliation. Our most meaningful legacy isn't measured by personal achievement alone, but by how effectively we transform individual opportunity into collective advancement. When we leverage privilege, whether inherited or earned, to dismantle the very barriers that limit others' potential, we create sustainable progress that transcends individual success. From where I stood, I could see Nathan nodding in agreement, our separate journeys converging around shared purpose if not fully reconciled history. The path forward remained uncertain in its personal dimensions, but the professional collaboration had demonstrated what neither of us might have believed possible a year earlier, that purpose could create bridges across even the most difficult terrain. The college fund my parents had redirected from my education to Nathan's had set us on divergent paths, one defined by inherited advantage, the other by forced independence. Yet 2 decades later, those paths had converged around shared commitment to ensuring that future students would encounter opportunity rather than obstruction, possibilities rather than limitations. That convergence represented not just personal growth, but systemic transformation, the ultimate testament to education's power to transcend the very barriers erected to contain it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your B screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.